I love all of you, but I'm disappointed in some of you knowing that I've been speaking at the personnel symposium, knowing I had a 1-year anniversary yesterday, knowing it's a busy week. Some of you had the audacity to ask, was the show going to get canceled this week? Friends, this show is why everything else exists, basically. So we would defer. We would turn down commitments before we canceled the show. Late Kick is live, as it should be. We are high atop a blazing hot downtown Nashville, Tennessee, Tuesday, August 6th, the year of our Lord 2024. Yes, we're jam-packed. How else would we bring you the show? I'm getting a lot of blowback on that little Michigan take I had the other night, but I'm going to defend myself as no one else is willing to do, so only I can, because I don't think I said anything out of line. However, some of you did, and your voice will be heard tonight. Camp Intel Scoop across the country. Got loads of it tonight, probably as loaded a fall camp Scoop and Intel segment as we've done all year because we've done 2 of them. Still, though, it's pretty loaded. Georgia, record prediction tonight. Oregon, record prediction tonight. Some of you are a little bent out of shape by what Auburn's doing in recruiting. We got bowl predictions on the show. We got what-ifs on the show. I heard on the street the live chat is back. The Rogue Renegade live chat segment is back on the end of the show, so get ready. They're watching us in Weatherford, Texas, Pacific Palisades, California. Management Country is tuned in tonight. Aurora, Colorado, Jacksonville, Florida. As I said, we're going to delve into the live chat at the end of the show, and for those of you who were around last Thursday, I think it was, anything can happen, and almost anything goes. At Late Kick Josh, make sure you're following Instagram, Twitter, at Late Kick Josh. There is so much happening in August. You would be shocked at what it takes to get a college football season off the ground in the major media/broadcasting world. I was in on some of it today at CBS with our big seminar. All of it's off the record and confidential. I'm not allowed to probably even tell you what I just told you. It is wild how many people have to do so many things to make one of those seasons go off without a hitch. So I'm going to give you nothing from that. However, I'm going to give you some scoop from this personnel and recruiting symposium a little bit later in the show. I've been a part of it over the last 2 days. It's still going on in Nashville for another day. Interesting stuff. So I'm going to get to that a little bit later. However, here's what I want to lead with tonight. This whole Michigan NCAA investigation, we led the show with it the other night. I told you what I felt. Since then, we've had Pete Thamel go on ESPN, and he and Dan Murphy authored the piece that we were reacting to the other night, where we found out a draft had been sent to Michigan, a notice of allegations is on the way, and that's kind of usual standard operating procedure for an NCAA investigation. It ties back to the whole Connor Stalions sign-stealing scandal from last year. So since then, a lot of you noticed a couple things. A lot of you noticed what I said the other night. I'll get to that in a second. But also, since Pete Thamel and Dan Murphy put that piece out, I think it was Pete that went on ESPN and said, I don't expect there to be a postseason ban or anything like that. I don't expect records to be stripped. I think he was mainly kind of the opinion I was of, and that is I just think whatever happens will be fine, suspension, that sort of thing's on the table, but all the old school NCAA type punishments are off the table. And so maybe that's true. I told you I got no information on that. Your guess is as good as mine on that front. I'm just going to react to that this way. Do we really know? Pete may know. Paul Feinbaum, saw him on there the other day. He may know. I got no clue. So I'm just baselessly speculating on this particular front. Do we really know? In other words, is there any confidence to be had by using precedent? I'm not quite sure. Even if you could go back in time and find a case that, broad strokes purposes loosely resembles this, this is not the same NCAA. It's not the same governance structure. I personally have felt there's a lot more rogue nature about this investigation. It's felt a lot more personal to me. So that's my outside opinion on that. They may be dead on the money. My guess would be they're on the money. But if I were a Michigan fan, I wouldn't just have total confidence in that because someone went on TV and said it, is what I'm saying. Like when I've got a draft of a notice of allegations, and that thing said the other day, Pete Thamel and Dan Murphy's reporting on ESPN.com the other day, it's worth a paper pop, said a level 1 violation for lack of institutional cooperation. I'm paraphrasing there. That wasn't the exact language, but that's not a small deal. That just kind of got glossed over. That's not a small deal. So that was what we led the show with the other night. And I told you a couple things the other night. The first thing I told you is what I've told you for months, even when this investigation was really heating up in the fall. And we were at the Penn State game. I'm still not going to tell that story, but we were at the Penn State game the day Harbaugh found out he wasn't going to be able to coach. He's suspended, so Sharon Moore, interim head coach, steps in, and they beat Penn State, and it's really emotional on the field. And then all throughout the rest of the season, like, what's going to happen? Is this title legitimate if they go on to win it? Well, they did go on to win it. Is it legitimate? And I told you, hey, if I was a Michigan fan, I wouldn't care about the outside noise. I would treat the edge of this season like the edge of a cliff. I'm not looking past 2023. I've got a generational team here. We're on a generational run. A lot of these guys came back for this. There's great continuity and culture inside the locker room to the point where the outside noise only galvanized them. And so I thought to myself, if I were a Michigan fan, I said the same thing all fall that I said the other night. I wouldn't care because the NCAA could do their worst. They can't take away my memories. I saw us beat Ohio State. I saw us win the Rose Bowl in overtime. I mean, that's a scene for the ages out there. I saw us beat Washington and win the national championship. I don't care if some four-letter organization in Indianapolis comes down the road and says, no, you have to give us that banner back. Well, you can't take my memory, and that's what it's all about for me as a fan. Now, I'm not a Michigan fan. So then I gave you part two the other night. And a lot of you, prayer emoji, a lot of you had a problem with it, which I suspected. So I'm going to address it. But as we always do on the show, the one thing that I do ask is, well, subscribe to the channel. The second thing I ask is make sure if you disagree with me, just make sure you're disagreeing with something I said. So in the interest of fairness, in the interest of full disclosure, I had producer Jesse and director Colin create a helpful minute to minute and a half clip from the other night. And so to be perfectly clear, if there's any question in the room, this is how I personally feel about the whole Connor Stalions sign stealing NCAA investigation into Michigan. Roll it, Colin. I was at all those games too. I stood on the sideline for every one of the games I just listed. I don't think Connor Stalions had anything to do with Michigan being able to put together that fourth quarter drive against Ohio State. I don't believe Connor Stalions had anything to do with Michigan coming from behind with about 5 and change left and them trailing Alabama, then getting it done with a stop in overtime. I don't think Connor Stalions had anything to do with that. I don't think he had anything to do with them largely owning Washington in the national title game. I just think they were the better team. I think they found a way. I think a lot of guys had their backs against the wall and they executed, and that's how I'll remember it. If you remember it differently, you go ahead and remember it differently. I just say my strategy on this is going to be I'm going to wait a little bit longer because as I've told you for a while now, I've told you I'm totally open to evidence being tossed out here that's not public yet that could change my mind. Still open to that. I just told you how I feel right now. If there's evidence that I don't know about, that hasn't been presented publicly yet, that's thrown out there that I look at and say, oh, now that's different than what I've seen so far. I may look back and say, yeah, I acknowledge none of that. That entire season's tainted for me. Now tear down the banner, and I'm tearing it down in my memory. Well, I'm not doing that right now. That's not how I feel about it. Was that really so bad? Yeah, it was. Even in the live chat, I'm looking right now, it's bad according to some of you. So, couple of things here. As I went on to say, in the interest of time, we're not going to play the full show from the other night. It is public in the archives, after all. As I went on to say, they broke the rules. They absolutely knew what they were doing. This is my opinion, by the way. This is not the NCAA's findings. They broke the rules. It wasn't Connor Stalions alone who knew what was happening. To suggest otherwise is to try and convince me that Michigan is run by a bunch of morons, and they're not. So, of course, more people than just Connor Stalions knew what was going on there. It's illegal. They ought to be punished for it. I just said all that. That's not someone else's opinion. I'm telling you that's how I feel about it. What I'm also telling you, just like any of us, anytime a rule is broken in any sporting event or any competitive culture, is I've got this line of demarcation. I've got basically a threshold in my mind beyond which I view an accomplishment as tainted. If your mind doesn't work like that, it's okay. If you think I'm telling you it's okay to cheat, I'm not. What I'm simply telling you is Michigan won a national title last year, And based on what I know and what's been reported about what they are alleged to have done, so far, what's on the table does not push beyond that threshold in my mind. So I think they did wrong stuff and they should be punished for it, but it will not taint that title in my mind. Then, as you heard me say, many of you are going to disagree with that. You're fine to, and we can agree to disagree. But I would say this, as Meemaw used to always tell me, she would say, Joshua, 90% of debates in sports would be solved and silenced if you just switched the logo. And Meemaw was right, as she always was, and that's the case here. Because if I did nothing more than take this story and pluck it from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and drop it into Columbus, Ohio, everybody's feelings would invert. Ohio State folks would be making the same argument my Michigan folks are making right now. And don't be told you soing to me out of Ann Arbor, because you know good and well you'd go full torch and pitchfork mode on Ohio State. So that's really all a lot of this is. Now notice I said 90% because there is a 10% group over here that really is about character and integrity and letter of the law. I salute you. I got full respect for you. Got no problem with you. So if you think that because rules were broken here, everything's tainted or everything deserves to be stripped and it doesn't have anything to do with your allegiance, then we may disagree on that, but I respect it. But I know, and you know as well as I know, that many of you are just yelling because the color of the confetti in the B-roll here is maize and blue, and it's not scarlet and gray, or it's not blue and white, or it's not green and white. You know, I mean, if we were to do nothing more than switch the color of that confetti, keep the details the same, a lot of you would mysteriously have less of a problem to no problem at all with this. So I, in closing, will say again, because some of you caught an Easter egg I was trying to drop of sorts the other night, hold your opinion until that documentary comes out. There may be some foolishness in that documentary. I guarantee you there will be some foolishness in that documentary. However, woven throughout it may be some really interesting stuff that offers you a much different perspective on how an NCAA investigation actually operates than standard reporting may offer you. That's all I'll say on that front. I have a report in my hand. Now, this is unconfirmed. This is an unconfirmed report. It has nothing to do with Michigan. Maybe it'll have something to do with Michigan because this report, unconfirmed, could take us to Michigan. And that unconfirmed report that I had just handed to me before we went on the air is the 2024 tour name will be revealed within the next week. I heard the gasps from the control room. I didn't even tell Jesse and Colin that was coming. They could have prepared a slider for it. And I have to ball this up and throw it away because it said the message will self-destruct a la Inspector Gadget in a few minutes. So yeah, sometime within the next week, 2024 tour name will be announced. I know what it is. I'm very happy with it. I've got my usual focus group out there. You know, Jenny Dell ended up deciding this for me. We were in the same spot last week. She said, what's the tour name going to be? Let me know. I let her know 2 finalists. And Jennifer, to her credit, she said, forget the other one. No, that one, the first one. That's the one you go with. And that's the one we're going to go with. So if it sucks, blame Jenny Dell. Next up, got tons of fall camp intel here. Okay, so much so that we're going probably 5 deep on this instead of just usual 4 teams that we do. At Notre Dame right now, the latest intel we're getting is, of course, firstly, they had a major injury the other day. So they lost the left tackle for the season. Huge blow. That's a big blow for anyone, but especially at Notre Dame because they were already replacing 2 offensive tackles that departed for the NFL. And now this. They were already probably looking at starting a couple of sophomores. They felt good about Jagasaw, though. 6'7", 330. Not a ton of experience, but he was a top 50 prospect a couple of cycles ago, number 8 overall offensive tackle. Well, he's done for the year. Okay, so Tosh Baker is the next name to know. He's a grad student. He's kind of a swing player, and so he'll probably shift out there to that tackle spot. He lost a spot last year, so at best, they're not going to count on guys to start that previously had lost a spot. Now, if he locked it down and played solid football, it wouldn't be the first time in the world we saw that happen. However, what do we know? We know the calendar says August 6th right now. That means you got 3 more weeks of practice before you play your first game. Then you got 12 of those. You got to stay healthy. They got to totally thread the needle health-wise here. That affects the way you practice and prepare, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. And secondly, think about week 1. Their over-under win total's 10.5, but that week 1 game, they are on the road in College Station. So I want you to picture taking a couple of uncertainties at tackle into Kyle Field, 100,000 plus, full throat. You got Nick Scowerton on the edge, and how undesirable that could be. Now, that's a negative. It's not all negative with Notre Dame. One thing other than that I am watching is corner depth. Ben Morrison's legit. Ben Morrison's a really good football player for them. The team, and some of the intel we're getting is not Morrison. Past him, corner depth, something they really need to develop, especially when they face teams that can get them into base nickel looks and dime looks, and teams that have that kind of depth to spread them out a little bit and test their second, third, fourth corners. Those are the teams that could give Notre Dame some issues. Now, there is very good information that we're getting on the wide receivers up there. Chris Mitchell is a transfer from FIU. He was a 1,000-plus yard guy last year. Very good player. And I'll tell you another thing that we got told. When's the last time we said this about Notre Dame? 7 or 8 guys they feel good about. They feel they can play winning football with as pass catchers. That's normally not what we're saying this time of year. So we got trouble at tackle. We've got some question at corner depth, and depth in the secondary in general. Receiver looks really good. Riley Leonard transferred in there at quarterback. So maybe Notre Dame finds ways to win games by scoring a little bit more than Notre Dame normally would. So that's what we got out of South Bend. Next up, in Austin, talked to some folks around Texas. So, Colin, I know we're going to clip this individually. So if you're listening live, ignore that it sounds like I'm about to repeat myself. I'm doing this for Director Colin. Got some good intel out of Texas over the past couple of days. My stance on them, with all these receivers and tight ends they had to replace, has been trust but verify. I trust that they got a lot of talent there, but I also trust that they lost a lot. And so a lot of times when you just think you're going to plug and play in this game, it doesn't work that way, especially when you're losing a whole bunch of guys who ended up being really good draft picks. So at Texas, got no doubt, they added good players, but I need to see it pan out. Okay? Well, that's me not being at practice. Then you talk to people who have seen practice, and the returns that we're getting are very, very, very positive. They're insanely deep at receiver. They have not very much concern about the depth, and another word there is versatility, because a lot of these guys are interchangeable, and if that's the case, we'll see it really, really early. They're loaded, really good vibe at receiver. So I have my concerns kind of alleviated on that front. Silas Bolden was a kid they got from Oregon State, 5'8", 160. They can move him all over the place. And the common feedback, again, is not just, oh, we got Isaiah Bond, or we got Nye Black at tight end, or we got Silas Bolden. It's not just that we got these guys. It's we've got these guys, and many of them are interchangeable. Many of them we can move around, and one can do what the other can do, and vice versa. So that's an ideal situation for a Steve Sarkisian offense, or really any offense. So that's one emphatic piece of feedback that I've gotten. The second one is something we hear a lot this time of year. Quinn Ewers has taken on the added leadership role, which goes in one ear and out the other, because, again, you hear that a lot. When's the last time I ever came on this show and I said, I'm hearing that University X's quarterback has really neglected the leadership role? No one ever says that in August. I don't even hear that in August off the record. Actually, we do sometimes, but it's very rare. So Quinn Ewers, it's important if he's done that. It's very important, because if you're looking at the intangibles, we had Craig Bowl. I sat down on a panel with him, former head coach at North Dakota State and Wyoming, and he was talking about Josh Allen and how he had Josh Allen once upon a time, and he's raw. He's got the physical tools, but he's raw. And he talked about how you bridge the gap from just having the physical tools to having the intangibles. And he talked about how it's a lot more art than science. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but that's kind of what you're trying to do with Quinn Ewers in Austin. Now, Anthony Hill, Jr., don't have much doubt about him. The only doubt about him is how good is he going to be this year. They are working him a lot at middle linebacker, and he was second on that team in tackles last year as a situational edge rusher. So 6'3", 235, moving him inside a little bit more. It reeks of the kind of headline we were talking about with Harold Perkins, except I expect much better returns this year from Hill than I did last year with Perkins. And you probably don't lose a ton at edge when you do this with him. Trey Moore transferred in, again, from UTSA, big-time addition because it allows you to do stuff like this. Ethan Burke's there, Barron Sorrell's there. So stack talent. When you stack talent, that's when you can do things like Bama's done in the past, like Georgia's done in the past, where you lose a lot of players, but then magically we turn on their game in week 1 or 2 or 3 and you say, it looks the same. Different numbers on the backs of these jerseys, but the product looks the same. Texas is not there yet. Texas has not achieved that level of blind trust that they'll just seamlessly reload, but this is how you get to that kind of place. Tennessee. Bad news out of Tennessee the other day. Jordan Thomas done for the year. That was their starting nickel star position, kind of a hybrid for them. DB was already going to be a big question on this team. They were replacing basically every starter back there, and this was a guy that they thought they could depend on. He's done, so they're going to have to either juggle that rotation or they're going to have to start multiple underclassmen, and that's what fall camp's for. Obviously, still got 3 weeks of it, but that's the bad news. And I don't think in any world people expect the Tennessee to have some top 10 passing defense, but they do expect potentially Tennessee to be able to score and score in bunches. This just means they may have to instead of choose to. Nico Iamaleava pushing the ball down the field really well in fall camp. I know they put out a lot of clips of it, but that's been pretty consistent from what we've been told in practice. Offensive line feels good with this team. And so when you go back and you think about spring football and you think about questions we had then, theoretically, a lot of the questions you have in spring should still exist in fall because they haven't played a football game yet. But as you get more work with the guys you're going to go to war with in the fall, your staff starts to learn things. If you got half-decent sourcing, you can talk to people who can feed you information that, hey, we like where we are here now. We still don't like where we are there now. The one thing that I think in a lot of the preview magazines that's a big question with Tennessee at is offensive line. And I've told you several times now, they're not terrified. They're not keeping themselves up at night about their situation on O-line. They think they'll be okay there. But the other thing that they're really emphatic about, and we saw it when I was over there in the spring, is the size and the speed and the just overall physicality of this team. Looks like a college football playoff team. That's all I'm saying. Looks like one. That means nothing more than it means. But in the past, we'll look at these preview magazine ranking, college football playoff odds type lists, and, you know, I'll be around at a lot of campuses, and I know what Ohio State looks like. I know what Clemson looks like. I know what Bama, Georgia looks like. Then you may go to Tennessee, and you may say, they don't look like them. Well, they haven't. Could still compete, but just you don't have the same caliber of athlete those other guys do. Tennessee, I would say this is the first time in a long time where the caliber of their athlete doesn't really look like it takes a back seat. Now, it's not on par quite yet, but it's not taking some distant back seat. So that's good news. Now, that's not how you win football games. You win football games, execution, situational awareness, and whatnot, and you can have the biggest, baddest dudes in the country. If you got the 120th best pass defense in the country, you're probably not going to achieve at a college football playoff level. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Clemson. I love where Clemson is headed at wide receiver. I'm so excited. I'm going to paper pop. I'm going to say it again because I've been waiting years to say this. Pretend this is in all caps. Caps lock. I love where Clemson is headed at wide receiver. So if you go back and watch the Clemson spring game, Bryant Wesco kind of put on a show. And he's a true freshman, 6'2", 182. He is not that big-bodied, lethargic-looking, can't create separation type receiver that, frankly, Clemson has played with for several years now. It's a far cry from where they had been in their mid to late 20-teens runs. Well, I'm not saying that we have reincarnations of those guys quite yet, but Bryant Wesco is a different kind of player. You knew it as soon as he stepped on campus in the spring. Dabo Swinney was not bashful about talking about it. Boom. So that's not changed. Then TJ Moore gets on campus, 6'3", 198. And look, Wesco at 182 is 20 pounds heavier than he was in spring. So he's put on a lot of size. He had to because they're going to need him this year. TJ Moore steps on campus later, 6'3", 198, and from Bell 1, when he's been in fall camp, it's the returns we get, like Austin Hannon over at Clemson 24/7, doing a really good job of documenting this for the public. Check mark, check mark, check mark. They love him. Everything that they thought he was, everything they hoped he'd be, he is. They expect, and this is not shocking, they expect a big bump in production from Cade Klubnik as a result of that. The year 1 to year 2 progression under Garrett Riley's offense, they now expect, because of those pieces, to be a massive upgrade in production. Jake Brenningstool is at tight end there. Phil Maffa back at running back. They like where they are enough at offensive line. Still a competition going on at the center position, but overall, they feel like they'll be worlds better. Don't turn the ball over, of course, would be a nice added bonus there. But the other thing about Clemson, you've known for a long time Clemson as a team you can count on to have big bodies up front that are athletic. Peter Woods, 320, playing edge, is that. Peter Woods would fit right in with those 2016, 2017, 2018 Clemson defensive lines. And I know how good they were. Woods could come in and probably take someone's spot on one of those lines. You're talking about 320 on the edge and moving like anything but a 320-pound defensive end / edge player. Avion Terrell also at corner. Excellent. Excellent. Future NFL guy, just like other people in that bloodline with that last name. So Clemson, again, explosivity, ability to separate, yards after catch, all that stuff they used to be mainstays at doing and haven't been doing. Maybe it's a couple of true freshmen that light that fire again. They played Georgia week 1. They got NC State week 3. They got Florida State week 5. So out of the gate, they got to be hot. There is no time for this offense to settle into itself, because if you do that, you may be 2-3 come October 12th. Lastly, I did want to touch for just a second on Wisconsin. So, Tyler Van Dyke transferred up there from Miami, and it sounded for a second like it was him versus Braden Locke for that quarterback position. I never really bought it. I don't still. It feels like he's separating and taking that job. Limiting turnovers. Again, that was what plagued him last year. Very schizophrenic. And so if you limit that, we've seen him play good ball before. Maybe he does it again. Smoother offense this year. Phil Longo, year 2. Kind of like Garrett Riley at Clemson. Phil Longo comes in year 1 at Wisconsin, and it was anything but what they expected. So maybe you get a smoother year 2 out of him. Lots of true freshmen in that 2 deep. Got to be. It's Fickle's guys. A lot of true freshmen there. Camp intel, man. You got to take a swig from the nondescript water jug after that. And then I'm going to tell you about one of my best friends, which, of course, is Academy Sports and Outdoors. So Academy, this time of year, we've got back to sports. We've got back to school on our minds. Every one of you virtually is going to deal with this. And if you don't, you just need random gear. Some of you are campers. Cool. Some of you are bikers. That's great. Some of you wear clothes during the day. Yeah. They've got all that at Academy Sports and Outdoors. They've got you covered if you don't have an Academy in your backyard. Academy.com. They make this show free. They have been there with us almost from the first moment we started this show. They believed in the vision early on. It's really important to us because now a lot of people believe in it. A lot of people want to advertise on the show. We slammed the door on a lot of folks, candidly, because I don't want to load the show up with that. But we always got a place for Academy because they've always had a place for us. And they are the place for you. And they didn't write that for me, but that sounded really good. So Colin bottled that one up. We may just play that as a ad placement of our own in the future. Academy.com, though. If you can't get there in person, Academy Sports and Outdoors and Academy.com. We've been predicting individual teams' records. A couple of weeks ago, we did our playoff predictions, tentatively, and I did my initial JP poll, again, tentatively. But I figured, why don't we do individual teams? Because a lot of you were just asking, okay, well, what do you specifically think about this team and that team? And I'm like, okay, we have an entire show every 48 or so hours that we can do this on. So let's talk about this. Our Georgia, well, not our Georgia. I will own this. My Georgia official prediction for this year. Here's what you need to know. Before I tell you what I think, the over-under win total is 10.5 at FanDuel right now. They got the best odds in the SEC to win the conference. They've got the best odds in the country to win the national championship. They are seeking their 4th straight undefeated season. And as we dive into this, here's another paper popper of a stat. This is kind of a padlock stat if you think about it. Saturday, November 7th, 2020. Where were you? Probably locked up in your house wearing a mask. But more specifically, what happened that day? Anyone? Anyone? Georgia lost a football game that day, I believe to Florida. The reason that date is important is because that is the last date that Georgia lost a football game to someone other than Alabama. If not for Bama, Georgia has not lost a football game since November 7th of 2020. So what do we think we know here? I think I know this will be a top 5 offense. It was last year. It's not like they need to improve at all. Running back, if you look at the positions across the board, Carson Beck came back, huge deal, obviously. Running back, offensive line, wide receiver, as good or better than they were last year. It's fair to expect that. Tight end loses Brock Bowers, and yet it's still one of the best tight end rooms in the country. Let me say that again. They lost Brock Bowers and still have one of the best tight end rooms in the country. That's called recruiting and developing. Mainly recruiting, though. But a healthy amount of development there as well. And I also think I know they got 2 first-rounders at least over on defense, and Mykel Williams and Malachi Starks. And there will be others, but those are 2 that you can pretty much take to the bank. And the third thing I think I know about Georgia is, even having said all that, this won't be easy. This won't be easy. Every year people get amnesia. This time of year, folks get amnesia, and you just bristle at the mere idea that the number 1 team in the country could lose a football game, or someone could pick against the number 1 team in the country to win it all. Well, do you watch this game? Do you watch this sport? This stuff happens every year. This team right here would have been favored to win the national title last year, even after they lost in Atlanta. But they didn't get a shot because it's hard to win this sport. Even when you load these classes up like Kirby Smart does, even when you're favored wire to wire, it's hard, and it will be this year as well. Now, here's what I want to know. I want to know how good they are up front on defense. If there's one request that I get more than any request about the show, I got it like 50 times today because I talked to a lot of personnel types today. It is, please talk poorly about us. Please don't be hyping us up. Please don't be feeding us rat poison. So I happen to know several players on that defense watch the show. So I'm going to do you a favor. I don't really fully believe all of this, but I will say maybe Georgia's just pretty good up front. Maybe that's it. Maybe they're not elite. Maybe they don't have that vintage Georgia flavor there. Maybe I can convert 3rd and 3 on them with regularity. Maybe they can't get home against the quarterback regularly enough. Maybe it's not quite Georgia of the past up front. Was that good? Guys, was that good? You know who I'm talking to over there. All right. Hey, man, Georgia's still going to be pretty good up front. But I do mean what I say when I do wonder how good will they be there. Because there's a difference between that Georgia elite standard versus pretty to really good. And the difference is getting home 1 or 2 more times per game against the quarterback, forcing 1 more turnover or 2 more turnovers that could define a season for you. So, it's not a game. Well, it is a game, but it's not something to be played with. Next, the corner depth behind Dalen Everett. It's interesting. First world problem, because Georgia, when you talk about green players, you talk about unproven players. Man, I'm talking about Julian Humphrey, like Ellis Robinson, just freak show players that don't have a ton of starting experience. But when you go look at, like practice B-roll, or if you get to go to practice and you watch these dudes, you're just standing there and you're saying, who is that? And that's just Ellis Robinson. The elite freshman? Yeah, that's him. He looks like the seniors look on some of the teams Georgia's going to play. Yeah, actually, no, their seniors don't even look that good. So, yes, this is a question. Behind Dalen Everett, Dan Jackson's got 6 starts. I think they worked him at safety some this week. Daniel Harris, Julian Humphrey, Ellis Robinson. Yes, technically, I still have to see the production. Yes, technically, it's not there. These are good football players. Well, these are players who have elite skill, and they'll probably be good football players for Georgia this year. But can they pressure the quarterback? This was an issue for them last year. When we talked to Kirby in February, we went down there, did a whole show at Georgia, had him on the show for 30 minutes. He said that was one of his biggest concerns. Can we get after the quarterback enough this year? I know some of you think it's stupid to talk about sacks. I've gone full circle on the stat. I know that sacks are not the end-all, be-all. I actually know if I pressure the quarterback and don't sack him, but my pressure forced an interception that goes back to the house, that's actually better than a sack. I know all that, guys. But I think people have overthought the room on this. There's never been a sack in the history of football where the offense got positive yardage. There's never been a sack that was a good thing for the offense. So I've gone full circle. I'm actually about to start throwing sacks back in people's faces. Immunity of the highest order on that line. But sacks, new rule, sacks are cool again. Georgia was 47th in the country in sacks last year. This is the whole reason behind that spiel, so I can just throw that stat at you. Michael, I think, had 4.5 sacks and led the team. So whether you want to talk about havoc rate, quarterback pressures, quarterback hurries, outright sacks, Georgia wasn't quite Georgia last year in that category. I know they've worked on it ad nauseum. Will they be much better there? Here's the staff breakdown. We got every coach, coordinator, assistant coach graded in the entire country. Georgia's got the number one head coach in the country. Georgia's got a top 5 staff as we see it right now in the country. This defensive support staff, beneath the coordinator level, in other words, is top 15. Now, that offensive support staff lost some guys. It's really hard to retain when you're an elite staff. Like Del McGee's not there anymore, for example. We still got that offensive support staff top 30, maybe down a tick from what we've seen in the past at Georgia. Kirby Smart, how about this? So we've got him as the top active head coach. Also, we've got him as the highest graded defensive coordinator of the last 15 years. So another word for that is stud, but I wanted to put an actual numeric grade on it. There's no real weakness here. It's just relatively speaking, that offensive support staff may be down a touch in overall grade quality. The schedule is extremely tough for Georgia this year. Georgia's hung out in the SEC East for a long time. This is not the SEC East anymore. I've got them playing 6 of my top 21 teams preseason power rating wise. I've got them playing 6 of my top 21 teams, and they play 5 of them away from home. A couple of those are neutral site games, but 5 or 6 of those are away from Athens. They got at Texas, they got at Bama, they got at Ole Miss, Tennessee at home. They go to Kentucky. We've got Kentucky, I think, 26 in the JP poll. I'm not even mentioning that. At Kentucky would be some of you guys' toughest games. And so the cumulative effect that this can have is to the degree that I don't think there's a whole lot of skill in looking at a schedule and mapping out your wins and losses. I'll give you a record projection in a second, but I don't give you the specific games that I think you'll win or lose. It's fun. I don't think there's a lot of skill in it. But that's a tough schedule. It will test your depth. That's what it will do. The best case and worst case for Georgia this year, there's always a best case scenario of 12-0 as long as Kirby Smart's at Georgia. However, the worst case for them, considering the schedule, has to be a little bit more extreme than you'd normally expect it to be with Georgia. So I got their worst case at 8-4. How would that happen? A quarterback injury combined with this schedule. It's pretty basic. Worst case for everyone is just a bunch of injury. You lose your tough games. Georgia plays a lot of tough games. What I think they'll do, this is going to be controversial. I've got them going 10-2 right now as we sit here in early August. I think there may be 2 losses on that schedule. That still makes them a playoff team, but if you want to know how Georgia can be favored in the SEC, I've got them power rated number 1. I think Georgia enters the season as the best team in the country. I think this schedule is tough enough that the best team in the country could stand to lose 2 games, which sounds counterintuitive. It's not. Schedule is not equal. Record is not equal, therefore, in college football. So 10-2 for the number 1 team in the country. Is that possible? It is possible. It's also possible that if Georgia makes the playoff, with a 10-2 record, they may still be a point spread favorite against anyone they play. There's a world where that's possible. I had a fun couple of days here. We've been in Nashville because I live here, but we've been in Nashville, as has the Personnel and Recruiting Symposium. This event's huge now. We had, I think, between 600 and 700. It's just recruiting staffers, personnel staffers, had, I think, almost every NFL team represented here, a ton of people from the agency world, a ton of people from the tech world. It's unbelievable. It was over at the Renaissance in downtown Nashville. I did a panel yesterday. I did a discussion with Craig Bohl, who was at North Dakota State, won titles there. He went to Wyoming. Now he's the executive director of the AFCA. I mean, they were instrumental in getting a lot of these rules passed that just got passed, and awesome conversation. I'd never met Coach before. Awesome conversation. I can't show it to you because it's off-record stuff. Everyone has to put their phones in a bucket and whatnot, but really good stuff. Awesome feedback. The reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to know, by the dozens and dozens, I talk to staffers all the time, but oftentimes it's not in person. So this is the chance to interact with a lot of coaches and a lot of personnel types in person. And by the dozens, safely by the dozens, I would say the feedback we get on the show is such a testament to what you guys have helped us build. We try to advocate for this game, okay? First and foremost, we're just going to throw on a white T-shirt. I'm going to do the show, and we're going to advocate for college football because I grew up loving college football. This is not a bridge for me to get somewhere else. You know, I don't do like some folks in our industry and want to cover politics, but I can't quite get there at the outset. So I just use sports as a springboard to hopefully get there. No, this is it, man. College football is it. Love the game. Need it to continue to be as strong as it's ever been. The folks in that building over the past couple of days are instrumental in that. And they give us great feedback. A lot of the opinions we have on this show are born out of information that we get from them. We haven't burned a single one yet, and we never will. But the trust that we have with a lot of these coaching staffs could not be possible if you didn't give us a big enough platform to make the show noticed. Okay, we got the most watched and listened to college football show in this entire space, podcast and digital. So you guys did that. So then the effect of that is everybody in the coaching world, everybody in the personnel and recruiting world sees it, and then you get doors open for you that you never would have gotten opened when you're working down in Columbus, Georgia a few years ago. So I wanted to tell you guys that because you would not have otherwise seen that. So that's a direct testament to you. And then to the folks I couldn't talk to over at that symposium, thank you guys. DMs are always open. Feel free to reach out. Want to advocate for the game. That's what we want to do. And fortunately now we're in a position where we can do it. Let's talk about some what-ifs. Still got a lot of show to go. So stay buckled up. Here's a what-if for you. What if a former sleeping giant, or I guess a current sleeping giant in college football, awakens this year? Whomst would that be? I think Virginia Tech counts. Now, kids, some of you in my college-age audience are laughing right now, but you shouldn't be. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know about Virginia Tech, the national championship contender. But Virginia Tech used to be a national championship contender. You don't know about an entire generation, including me, who grew up not Virginia Tech fans, but when we knew there was going to be like a Thursday night game in Blacksburg or even a Saturday night game in Blacksburg, didn't matter who you rooted for. You would make sure you tuned in. And you make sure you tune in 10 minutes before the game starts because you get to see Enter Sandman and you get to see this incredible spectacle up in the mountains, up in the hills of Virginia. It's awesome. We haven't seen that as a national spectacle for a while. What if they wake up? They've got a shot this year. They've got a shot. They got a workable schedule. They've got a team that's totally in touch with its identity. They could have a high-level run game with Kyron Drones at quarterback contributing to that. I was up there this spring, sat down with Brent Pry, really excited up there. Colin, if you've got their schedule, can you throw that up for just a second? Because there is a game. It's a long way away, so I'm not saying let's start talking about it now, but there's a game in early November where if they navigate the early portion of their schedule, even if they just have one loss, they can afford to drop one. But if they're a one-loss or better team in early November, That's when Clemson comes to town. November 9th, Clemson comes to town. If we have a one-loss or better Virginia Tech on that day or night, you will see Lane Stadium like some of us remember it being maybe a generation ago. Texas A&M could be another sleeping giant. Now, I'd argue A&M's not been a giant because A&M, we have not known A&M as a consistent national championship contender in my lifetime. Most of your lifetimes you hadn't known that. However, they've been a sleeping giant in the sense that they've always been capable of it, and that's been this whole debate on this show. One of the longest-running debates in Pate State history has been Texas A&M. Do they have what it takes to win? Just because they haven't won, could they win? My answer is, of course they could. Just because you haven't done something doesn't mean you couldn't do something. They got the right head coach. Mike Elko's the right guy. At least I feel that. Now, power ratings-wise, it's interesting because you would think, hire the right guy, okay, a couple years from now we'll check back in. No, they could win this year. Would be sort of tough, but power ratings-wise, I got them as a top 15 team. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that a little organizational structure thrown into the mix with some really good football players could yield a result. But even if it's not this year, just imagine it happening, period. Nebraska, a lot of folks flat out think it can't happen there. At A&M, at least they can recruit the South. A lot of folks think Nebraska, no, your time is past. What if they're wrong? What if Matt Rule takes Dylan Raiola and he just hitches his wagon to that true freshman five-star quarterback and things start to happen? Hey, here's a good what if. Just imagine, what if Nebraska's like 5-0 in one-possession games this year? That alone would blow people's minds. So that's a good what if. Another what if, week 1, a lot of potential volatility in this game. You know LSU plays USC in Las Vegas, week 1 on a Sunday night. What if that game's a blowout? I don't care who wins. What if it's a blowout either way? What if one of these teams wins by 20 plus? You don't think that's possible? It's highly possible because the nature of these two teams is there's so many question marks. Anytime you got big glaring question marks around these kinds of teams, but they got good offensive weapons, there is a chance that this happens. With LSU, we talked about this the other day. Great offensive line. They feel really good about their tailbacks. So let's say LSU's DBs are pretty good, okay to pretty good, to where USC can't torch them. They would have a massive matchup advantage against Southern Cal. They could just lean on them with the ground game, and it could be really ugly for USC. Now, there's another side of that coin. What if USC just torches LSU secondary? What if LSU can't afford to run the ball because they're playing catch-up? And what if, even if Kyron Lacey's good, what if we kind of get to the third quarter and we realize, man, LSU, these are big shoes to fill. These pass catchers leaving 2,700 receiving yards on the table from last year. My point is, it would be really toxic feeling on either side of the equation. You lose this thing by 3 or 7, that's one thing. You lose that opener by 20 plus, that's an entirely different thing. And then, and here's a really important what if. Pay attention because this is going to happen to many of you. We've lost many a good man to this battle. What if one of you is faced with a classic Saturday conundrum? You may think I'm talking about the fall wedding. No, the fall wedding, while evil in its inception, can be seen coming from a mile away. If you're locked into a fall wedding, you probably already know about it. Some of you have been foolish enough to be looped into October 12th weddings. October 12th is the biggest Saturday of the year, and some of you have allowed yourself to be pulled into a wedding. I mean, God help you all. But there are other things that can happen. Sneak attacks, in other words. And I had a tweet about this the other day because I asked you guys, what are some phrases we want to avoid in college football? Now, I was looking for things like, you are what your record says you are, etc. But you guys took it a different direction. And one of you said, here's a phrase we want to avoid. It's a bye week. I bought us tickets to the pumpkin patch. This will happen to some of you, and it will be dropped in your lap Friday night or Saturday morning because your significant other thinks that your team being on a bye means Everyone's on a bye. College football doesn't happen that week. Pumpkin patch trip. Impromptu pumpkin patch trip. It is a slippery slope into the depths of depression in college football season. What if that happens? What are you going to do? I already found my out. I figured this out a long time ago. And that is get a job that requires you to work on Saturday, covering college football. That's my first piece of advice. 99% of you won't be able to pull that off. So you need a backup plan. I'm Bruce Willis in Armageddon. What's your contingency plan? We don't have one. What? You're the U.S. government. You're just supposed to sit around thinking stuff up. You're telling me you don't have a contingency plan? This is it? I got to go to the asteroid and I got to drill to the center of it, drop a nuke and leave? And that's the hope of the entire human race? Don't be Bruce Willis in Armageddon, okay? No one has to die over this, but you better have a good escape strategy for the pumpkin patch A-bomb that gets dropped on you. Also, I'll tell you another one. Hey, we're going to my parents' Saturday, remember? What are you going to do? You have no control, okay? You've got control of your Saturday, and then she drops that on you. Hey, we're going to my parents on Saturday, remember? Then you're at the mercy of whatever your father-in-law wants to put on the TV. And if your father-in-law is watching the Waltons marathon, are you really going to tell him, hey, man, North Carolina and Clemson are playing? No, you are not. No, you are not. So what are you going to do? Head on a swivel. You know it's coming. Head on a swivel. They're watching us in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. They're watching us in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Galloway, Ohio, Galveston, Texas. Appreciate you guys a lot. Let's continue to roll on. We have the makings of an hour and 20-minute show right now, so I need to pick up the pace. We're gonna run some tempo here. Immunity to the hand gesture. What's Oregon's record going to be this year? Well, first off, here's what you need to know. Over/under win total, 10.5, really high. They've got the second best odds at FanDuel to win the Big Ten. They've got the third best odds to win the whole thing, to win the college football playoff. They are recruiting like they never have before. Just signed the number 3 class in the country. Brought home, I think, the number 2 portal class in the country. So they are acquiring talent at a level they never have before. And they've done it good in the past, but never quite like this. So I think I know Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart at wide receiver. That's about as good a 1-2 as you're going to get at wide receiver in the country. Now, Evan Stewart's still got to do it, but the talent is there. I think the scheme is there. I'm going to talk more about the coordinator in a second. I think I know they're more than ready for the Big Ten style of play. I'll go a step further. I think they're ready to raise the Big Ten caliber of play up front. Now, that's a lot to say, but I do believe they can match and exceed the physicality that is required to survive a season in the Big Ten. I think I know Josh Connerly and Johnny Cornelius. That makes up a top 5 offensive tackle duo in the country. Blake Brockermeyer does a lot of good work for us. He put out his top 10 offensive lines the other day, got Oregon at number 9. And I'm looking ahead of them. And Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see any other Big Ten teams there. So does Oregon enter the Big Ten with the best offensive line in the conference? People are saying yes. Here's what I want to know about Oregon. Is that pass defense going to step up? Because it hurt them against Washington last year twice. They need transfers to pan out in that secondary. If they do that, they'll be okay. If they don't, then you got some track meets, and maybe not up and down the list of Big Ten teams they play. But eventually you're going to run into a team that can throw the ball on you. And if it's the playoffs, it's the playoff. If it's week 6, it's week 6. So that's the first thing. The second thing is on the other side of the ball, Dylan Gabriel. So they get him at quarterback. It's a big-time transfer. Gabriel's going to be right up there with some of the best odds to win the Heisman. Are they going to get top 10 quarterback play from him or top 3? Because that could be the difference in winning a title versus having another really good year, but the big one escaping you, which leads me to my other question. Is there a signature win on the schedule? Colin, I'm going to ask you to do something I normally don't ask you to do. I want you to throw up their schedule because we're just going to go ahead and actually talk about schedule now. I'll talk about the staff in a second. Look up and down this list. If you're listening on podcast, you know which games would be the signature wins. Like Dan Lanning last year had 2 shots at Washington. They didn't get it done. So he had a really good year, but folks looked and said, He lost the big one. He couldn't win the big one. Okay. Well, this year, they got Ohio State at home, October 12th. They go to Michigan November 2nd. Depending on what Michigan is this year, that one may qualify. And then maybe a Big Ten championship game. Maybe you're in the playoff. They got the players. Do they win the big one? Or look at the schedule again now. Could it be that they lose to Ohio State? They go beat Michigan, but maybe Michigan's like an 8-4 team this year, and then they lose again to Ohio State in Indy. So it's like last year's Washington problem. They get 2 shots at the Buckeyes, they go 0-2, and otherwise you don't think they really beat a top 10 team. They could be 11-2, and folks are still yelling at Dan Lanning, you hadn't won a big game, you hadn't won the big one. So those are the questions I have. Now, the game of the year is October 12th. That right there, Big Ten game of the year, maybe college football game of the year. They get an extra day's rest on Ohio State because that Michigan State game's a Friday night for them. Also, what's the effect of going to Michigan and to Wisconsin in a 3-week stretch late in the year? Let's keep an eye on that. But if they can get to the Big Ten championship game, pay attention to this. If they can get there, look at the very end of their schedule. They go to Wisconsin. There's a bye week. They get Washington at home. And then they would go to Indy. They got a really late bye. They got 2 byes. Everyone's got 2 byes this year. They got a bye week, the second to last week of the season. They get Washington at home, and then they go to Indy. If they play Penn State or Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, both of those teams will have played like 6 games in a row. Ohio State would be coming off the Michigan game. So if Oregon can get there, there's a pretty significant bye advantage that they would have. The best case with Oregon's 12-0 this year. Their best case record, absolutely 12-0. There's a chance they end up being favored in every game they play this year. So they could be 12-0. The worst case, I've got them going 9-3. I tinkered with the idea of Oregon going 12-0 as my prediction, but I'm going to have them go 11-1. JP Poll's got them rated number 3 in the preseason. I've got them going 11-1, but really I've got them going like 11.5 and 0.5 because I very nearly went 12-0 on them. Oh, yeah, you know what, Jesse? Good point. I skipped the entire staff piece. So I already gave you the prediction there. A couple of things I wanted to tell you as we have every one of these coaches graded in our internal model here. Don't have a grade for Dan Lanning because we want at least 3 years under your belt before we start to grade you. However, for the purposes of this segment, I can plug him in. So, like, if I were to plug what we currently have on Dan Lanning, the head coach, into the model, he would kind of slot himself between, like, Mike Elko and Rhett Lashley in terms of a grade. It's not apples to apples because those guys have been around. Well, Elko maybe not so much, but, like, the point is it's early. So we want intentionally a little more resume before we start to grade. Will Stein's the same at offensive coordinator. Will Stein, though, along with Colin Klein down at A&M, a couple of the best offensive coordinators, younger offensive coordinators in the country. This is a top 25 support staff at Oregon. If you wanted to point out a weakness, inexperience could be called a weakness. It's a question mark, more so than a weakness. And defensive support staff. They're probably a notch below some of the other big boy title contenders when it comes to grading defensive support staff. So there you go. Oregon, 11-1 this year, number 3 in the country, preseason JP poll. Does it sound right? Hopefully it does. Let's move on. Who has the best defense in the country this year? One of you asked this 2 or 3 days ago. I wanted to get to this. We have to tilt this heavily because the Big Ten it has some of the most horrific offensive performance that you'll ever see. Last year they had like 6 ranked in the 100s total offense. So yes, that skews things. So like Ohio State, top 3 last year, almost everyone back. They added Caleb Downs. Yeah, they're up there. Michigan got All-Americans at all 3 levels of the defense. Will Johnson, as good as it gets at corner. Mason Graham, ditto at defensive tackle. Penn State, you got Carter and Sutton on the edge. Really, really good combo there. Iowa, just Iowa defensively. So all those teams, they're up there. They should be up there. Outside of the Big Ten, I think Notre Dame belongs in this conversation. I think it's one of the best defensive lines in the country. I think Ben Morris is an excellent corner. Xavier Watts, you could say the same thing about him at safety. Georgia, we just earlier in this show did a piece on Georgia. We were talking about, is the pass rush going to be there? Only 47th in sack rate last year. Will they be able to pressure the quarterback like they have in the past? Well, again, these are first world problems because we're not judging Georgia against 2018 Georgia or whatever. We're judging them against the other teams in the country in 2024. Georgia will still be really good. How those secondary pieces shake out, how those pass rushing pieces shake out, that'll determine, along with health, whether they're up here in the top 5. That Clemson defensive front has my attention. Avion Terrell, like I said, lockdown corner. That's the caliber of play that I expect from him. So you could talk Notre Dame here. You could talk Georgia, Clemson. I hesitated to put Bama in there because I question the depth and the lack of proven production in the secondary. So there were some other teams I looked at, but those are 3 outside the Big Ten that I'd roll with. Now, another question. I wanted to hit a couple of these right quick before we move into the final stretch of the show. Oh, hold on just a second now. Someone just said, don't sleep on Texas's defense. I'm not even supposed to be looking at the live chat yet. Waves Deep is the poster. Are you telling me you think Texas will have a top 5 defense this year? Because that's kind of what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about the best in the country. Do we think Texas is going to lose Sweat and Murphy off the interior and be a top 5 defense? Jesse, let me know what he says. Who has the easiest schedule in the country this year? Who has a workable path? I do have an updated bit of information from FanDuel. Liberty now has the best odds to go undefeated this year. Why? Well, they don't play any Power 4 teams. Anyone? No one has a problem with that? Okay. And that's notable because the G5 went 16-94 against Power 4 teams last year. Liberty, don't have to worry about that. They don't play any. And sure enough, if they go 12-0, they're in the playoff. Man, the auto bid's just a great, great thing for everyone, isn't it? Utah in the Big 12, I think, has the most workable schedule. They play 7 of the bottom 9 teams in the Big 12 preseason playoff odds. So they go to Oklahoma State in week 4. That's a really big game. Really looking forward to that one. They got Iowa State at home late. They go to Orlando for a Thursday game to end the season. I think in the let's go to the ACC right quick, Jesse. SMU and Syracuse. We looked at both of these. Remember, kids, SMU is in the ACC now. SMU plays 2 top 25 teams, and one of them is FSU, and that's at home. They play 5 of the bottom 6 teams in the ACC. As for Syracuse, horrible out of conference. They play no Clemson. They play no FSU. They play 5 of the bottom 7 teams in the conference in terms of preseason odds. So SMU and Syracuse couldn't ask for more there. In the Big Ten, yeah, it's Rutgers. Rutgers, no Penn State, no Ohio State, no Oregon, no Michigan. They play 0 teams with a preseason over-under win total above 8.5. What more could you ask for if you're Greg Schiano? It's Missouri in the SEC, very clearly. Now, they do face 4 top 25 teams. They only face one of them in the top 10, and that's Alabama, right there, October 26th. Their out-of-conference is Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and UMass. Now, in fairness, they are going to gird up their loins and go on the road to UMass. Jesse, do we have the SEC's record at UMass? We don't have that. Okay, we'll get that. We'll get that in time. All 4 bottom teams in the SEC. Missouri draws all 4 of them. So, if Missouri is in Atlanta at the end of the year, don't be shocked because it could happen because they're a good team, but they also have a very workable schedule. Now, I did want to touch on one more thing here, and we're going to get to bold predictions, then we're going to go to live chat. One of you hit me, Auburn Jeff from Alexander City, Alabama, hit me and said, hey, so we're just not going to talk about Auburn recruiting like we did when Bama was hot? Jeff, that doesn't sound like me. Absolutely, we're going to talk about Auburn recruiting. Got the number 5 class in the country right now. In case you haven't been paying attention out there, is Hugh Freeze about to land back-to-back top 10 classes? Yes, he probably is. And if they do that, that'll be the first time since 2016, 2017. Now, since July 27th, Auburn has landed 5 players inside the 24/7 Sports Top 247. They landed Jared Smith the other day. That's a 5-star edge player. They flipped 4-star wide receiver Derek Smith from Alabama. That was a dagger to the ribs for the Crimson Tide. They've currently got 12 in the top 247 committed. Josh, commitments don't mean anything. It's just July. It's August. They don't mean anything. My offer's on the table. I do this anytime someone tells me verbal commits don't mean anything. My offer's on the table. Jesse, how many do they have committed right now? Total. Is it 21? Yes, it looks like 21. Okay, so let's just go with 21. I'm going to take those 21 kids. For every one of them that decommits, I give you $1,000. If for everyone that stays committed, you give me $1,000. To this date, no one's taken me up on this, which leads me to believe that people don't really mean what they say when they say verbal commits mean nothing. Now, what about quarterback, Josh? They don't have a quarterback. Where's the quarterback? Well, there is not a quarterback on that commitment list, at least not a high-level quarterback on that commitment list. I don't know how much longer that's going to be the case, friends. I don't know how much longer that's going to be the case. I'll just throw up the deuces on that. 11 commits from the state of Alabama. You know, the slider's there, so I might as well talk about it. Deuce Knight is committed to Notre Dame. Now, once upon a time, I thought Notre Dame had that kid locked up. I don't know if they've got him locked up anymore. Auburn's making a lot of noise. A couple of people I trust in the recruiting space outright think Deuce Knight will flip to Auburn. That hasn't happened, at least unless it happened in the past hour. But Auburn's a major player there. From Mississippi, they're a major player there. They got 11 commits from Alabama, though. And that age-old question is being asked again, how valuable is in-state recruiting? Because Bama's still got a higher-rated class than Auburn does. And it's littered with players from coast to coast. And Hugh Freeze is going and locking down all the players in the state of Alabama. It means something. I can't tell you how much it means, but it means something. And I've stood on the field for many an Iron Bowl, and there is an intangible quality. There is something that bleeds out of players from that state when they're playing in that game that's always a knife fight anyway. It means something. I can't quantify it. Just like I can't quantify home field advantage at Jordan-Hare Stadium, there's just something weird that happens there. There's something different when you're playing your in-state rival with a bunch of in-state players. It means something. I don't know how much it means, but it means something. FanDuel got your over-under on Auburn right now if you want to go bet them. The exclusive odds provider of our show, FanDuel's got over-unders on Auburn. Maybe not recruiting odds quite yet, because that feels a little icky. Slippery slope. By the very definition of a slippery slope, that would be one. But FanDuel's got odds on Auburn. They got odds on Bama. They got odds on Minnesota. They got odds on everyone right now. Go over there and check them out. Told you right now, if you think Liberty's going to go undefeated, you can go over there and bet yes on Liberty to go undefeated. They got odds for teams to go undefeated. And if you think someone's not going to go undefeated, if you think someone's not going to make the playoff, again, all of these are over there and ready, willing, and able to be bet on. FanDuel, the exclusive odds provider of Pate State. Really appreciate them. About to expand our profile with FanDuel. All right, last thing, at least on the template for tonight. Bold predictions. What do you believe about this season that you'd be willing to bet your money on? First up, I'd say this is very bold. Kyle from Bellefontaine, Ohio. Ohio State wins every game they play this year by 2+ possessions. Now, there was a big fight in the office today, and general rule of thumb is any fight in the office that producer Jesse wins, I let him win. I did let him win this one. Our fight was, is this question saying regular season, or should we just count any game? Okay, so we're going to count any game. If Ohio State wins every game they play by 2 possessions or more, that means they win the national title. So that means they're going to win every game on the schedule, including going to Oregon and winning by 9 or more. They're going to go to Penn State and win by 9 or more. Now, that's important because Ohio State right now at FanDuel, 1.5-point dog at Oregon, 3.5-point favorite at Penn State. Okay, so they win both of those. Then they go to the Big Ten title game. They don't play some tomato can from the West because divisions are no more. So they play the legitimate second-best team in the Big Ten. So if it's Oregon, they get them again. They got them beaten by 9 or more again. Then they go to the playoff. They would almost certainly be the number 1 seed. They get a first-round bye. Then they got to win 3 games by double digits in the playoff, including the semifinal and the national title game. I don't think that's going to happen, even if Ohio State does win it all. So I'm going to call that a 9.75 on the boldness scale. Next up, what a story this would be. Seth from Euless, Texas said Connor Wigman is a Heisman finalist in his first year under Colin Klein. Talked about Colin Klein earlier. Think the world of him as an offensive coordinator. But how much are they going to throw the ball? The pass catcher situation there doesn't jump off the sheet to me. Colin Klein looks at a guy in Connor Wigman, his quarterback, that when healthy is good, but health has been a major concern here. They got a tough schedule. They face a number of really good pass defenses. Now, right now, he is tied for the 10th best odds. Wigman's got the 10th best odds to win the Heisman. So this isn't out of left field by any stretch. I still call it a 9. Maybe I shouldn't be that bold on it, but I'm going to call it a 9. Wigman, Heisman finalist. Next up, listen to this one because it actually is not as bold as you think it is. Josh Smith from Bowersville, Georgia. He gave me his last name, so I used it. He said, after looking at the North Carolina schedule this fall, they'll go 10-2 and contend for an ACC title. Max Johnson, top 3 ACC quarterback. Let's simplify it. Let's just say North Carolina goes 10-2. That's the prediction. How's this going to happen? Drake May's gone. They lost their entire offensive line. They're 50th in preseason S&P Plus. They're 99th in returning production. How would it happen? Well, it probably won't, is the answer. However, if it does happen, it'll be because defense improved, which it almost certainly will, with Jeff Collins in there now. O'Marion Hampton is one of the best running backs in the country, and they've got him there. They return all of their pass catchers except for Tez Walker, and much to the chagrin of the NCAA, Tez Walker got to play college football last year. Hate it when kids get to live out their dream. It's terrible. 6 of the bottom 7 teams in the ACC are on their schedule. So, if they had Georgia's schedule, they're probably going 3-9. But they don't. So there is a world, if we were to do the best case for North Carolina, there is a 10-2 somewhere in the cards. I don't think they're going to do it, per se. I'm still going to make this a 9. Jesse, I'm calling an audible. I had a 9.25. Let's make that a 9 on the boldness scale. I talked myself down 1/4 point. And lastly, DJ from Orem, Utah. The SEC goes undefeated in the playoff against non-SEC teams. Okay, so the SEC in the playoff era is 16-6. They are 14-4 versus non-SEC teams. The losses were all by Alabama. Just choke artists under Nick Saban, as it turns out. They lost to Michigan last year, couple of title losses to Clemson, and they lost to Ohio State in 2014. Those are the only losses the SEC has in the entire playoff era against non-SEC teams. However, we're going to have more opportunities for the SEC to lose now because we have more playoff spots. So you're asking perfection. In the interest of this prediction, it would actually behoove the SEC to only get like 3 teams in. Let's just say you got 3 really good teams, then there's a big drop-off in the SEC, so there's not competitive balance or parity at all. Well then, let's say like Bama, Texas, and Georgia are really good. Well, they could all win, or if they lose, it's to each other. But if you get like 5 SEC teams in there, someone's losing to a non-SEC team. So I'm going to call this a 9 on the boldness scale. And that's perfection. They asked that of Herman Boone at T.C. Williams, and they did go undefeated. But most of the time, perfection's hard to come by in college football. Okay, we're going to the live chat. Let's do it. We're off the grid now. Management's turned the show off. I'm pulling my laptop in front of me. I'm looking at the live chat. What are we talking about tonight? Oh, I have to refresh it as well. We did this a couple of nights ago, and we just kind of hung out here. And I looked at the live chat. What did we talk about the other night? We ended up talking about boxcar children, had a really healthy conversation about book fairs. So let's go. There will be some awkward silence in this, because I have to read. God bless and go blue. Yeah. Joshua hit us up, asked a really important question. When are we getting a new studio? When I know, you'll know, Joshua. When I know, you'll know. Is the new Twisters better than the original? No, it is not. It is really good. It is really good. Luke wants me to talk about thoughts on Israel and Iran. Here are my thoughts. No. No are my thoughts. Thoughts on okay, Luke, I gotta do it to you, buddy. I gotta ban you. Goodbye. Wow, we can't troll each other now. I never said that. I never said that at all. I'm all for trolling. Just I don't want to be trolled. I'm pro-trolling as long as it's not at my expense. Next up, any chance on making it to Gainesville this year? Yeah. There are actually probably 3 or 4 times. If we look at the schedule, we can make it down there. Now I don't have anything finalized yet, but I would bet we do make it to a Florida game this year. That's what I would bet. What's my Auburn prediction? I have not done that yet. Waves Deep, did you name the Saturday tour yet? No. I led the show tonight, almost led the show, by telling you I will name the tour within the next week. That was an unconfirmed report, but since it was from me, you can pretty safely assume it's confirmed. How did I become a college football fan? I was born. Director Collins doing some things right now. If you're listening on podcasts, you don't even know. So we are in a makeshift studio. It's kind of a bomb shelter, Colin, I would call this. A bomb shelter with a tile ceiling because we are in between studios right now. Now, in our normal studio, we had like a 3-camera setup. We've had 1 camera. It's been a pure hostage situation in this place. So Director Colin somehow found a way to get another camera in here. And we've been messing around with angles. And Colin said, hey, do you want to try this tonight? And I said, is it white balanced? Do we have it framed right? And he said, no. I said, let's just wait until the live chat when management isn't watching. We'll just play around with it. So this is Colin messing around with the live shot with the second camera there. Joshua, a lot of Joshuas watching the show. Said, are you coming to Norman for the Tennessee game? Could be coming to Norman for the Tennessee game. Now, there are other big games that day. Who plays? The Michigan's got a big game that day. I was looking at it. I was trying to map out the tour. Will I be at the Cotton Bowl this year? Cole, that's the biggest Saturday of the year. We were talking about it an hour ago. I don't know is the answer because we are in a blessed enough position where I don't have to choose the game I go to until 6 days beforehand. But that's a big one. That's the same day Ohio State plays at Oregon. So it's going to be a tough choice. Brandon asked, what brand T-shirt do I wear? I can't tell you that because they hadn't paid for me to tell you that, Brandon. That would be a big deal. Like I can tell you this is a Publix jug of water over here. I don't really mind that. But this T-shirt is like the foundational element of this show. And it is a company. I'm not telling you which company it is until they pay for it. It's almost as shocking as back in the Attitude Era, no beer company sponsored Steve Austin. And he's drinking on live TV every Monday night. Just a fantastic dropping of the ball by marketing departments from coast to coast. Am I hitting the gym after the show? Drew, no, I hit the gym in the middle of the day. That is the biggest blessing of this job. Well, aside from going to any game I want to, the biggest blessing of this job, and also getting to talk college football for a living, the biggest blessing of this job is I get to make my own schedule, which means I get to work out in the middle of the day. That's awesome. Because for a long time, I did 5 a.m. workouts, which I hate them with a passion, or I did night workouts, also hate them with a passion. And I know a lot of you have to do that. In fact, I know there are thousands of you who are at gyms right now, and you are listening to the show live. And I salute you. I salute you. Couldn't be me, though. Why do the Braves suck? I don't know, Hayden. Probably because I hadn't talked enough or watched them enough this year. Am I coming to Aggie Land this year? I sure do want to. I was talking to an LSU coach today. I haven't been to LSU in 3 years. It's one of my favorite places to go. The schedule has not fallen the way I wanted it to get down there. Same way with Texas A&M. We were down there a couple of years ago. I've been down there a couple times in the last few years. Will Miami be an underdog in any game this year? That'd be a good segment. I have to look at the schedule. They probably will, but I will have to also have to see how the season starts out. Someone's at the gym right now. Yeah, I know a lot of you. See, a lot of you do not listen to music in there. You listen to podcasting. I mean, we make this show to be listened to in the gym, so I do appreciate it. Is Ohio State a tough team? Roman, what are we talking about? Are they a tough team? Yeah, they're a tough team. Hadn't been as tough as Michigan the last few years, though. So that's really all that's mattered, huh? That's why I look at their style of player that they have, and I say and continue to say they could play the same style Michigan has, and I'd choose to if I were them. When I think about Ohio State the last few years, I think incredible talent at receiver. Well, I also think about them getting pushed around in some key moments. Well, that shouldn't happen. It doesn't have to happen. They should be able to be the wrecking ball instead of the wall. They should be able to do that. So, hey, I don't know. We'll see. Had Ryan Day on the show a couple of weeks ago. Said, were there philosophical shifts that you wanted to make in your team? He said, yeah, there were. Don't want to talk about them specifically, but yeah, there were. I'd be willing to bet you a Buffalo nickel, as Meemaw would say, that's one of them. Am I coming to Camp Randall this year? Justin asks. Hopefully. Never been there before. In fact, I've never been to the state of Wisconsin before. Pathetic. And so we're going to try and pull that off. I want to tell you one thing. So I don't have to do anything. I am going to the Mississippi Gulf Coast for the rest of the week. Then I'm going to go home to Georgia. Then we'll be back here for Sunday. So Late Kick Extra podcast, either Thursday or Friday in your podcast feed. But this entire concept of live chat interaction, I love. It's kind of like we do Friday Night Lines during the season, but that's just gambling related. This is just whatever. Who's the best country artist right now, Matthew asks. I cannot be put on record with that answer at the moment. Hit me back later. Anyway, what I was going to say is make sure you're following at Late Kick Josh. Instagram Live, for example, is a place I could just fire this sort of thing up anytime I want to. And we may do that in the coming months, just this year in general. So I got to get out of here because Director Colin has a lot to do with this show, post-edit. So appreciate you guys. We will be back Sunday Night Live. We'll have a Late Kick Extra pod that's just in the podcast feed, so make sure you're subscribed there. And check, because you think you are, but you may not be, make sure you're subscribed and bring 5 of your friends along with you. For Director Colin, for Producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. We'll see you later this week and then Sunday Night Live. Until then, God bless.